Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today on the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund Solar for All competition. I'm Elizabeth Charchenko. I'm a special advisor for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund at EPA. On this call, I'm joined by a number of my colleagues, including Nicole Steele, Senior Advisor for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, as well as Stephanie Rich, Attorney Advisor for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Before we get started, I want to run through a few logistics. To ensure our speakers are the focus of today's presentation, all videos are currently turned off and microphones are muted. We will not respond to questions directly today on this webinar, but we are collecting questions and will post responses to those questions publicly on our FAQ page on the GGRF website. If you would like to submit a question, please use the Q&A feature. We also want to thank everyone who has already submitted questions to our email at ggrf@epa.gov. A number of those questions will be answered in the material presented today. We will also collect those questions and post responses to those questions on our FAQ page on our website, in addition to questions collected today. To view closed captioning, please click on the live transcript in the menu on the bottom of your screen and select Show Subtitle. This webinar is being recorded and will be published on the EPA GGRF website with the slide presentation used in this webinar. We'll cover a number of topics today in our presentation, covered in the NOFO, as well as giving an overview of the program. As I mentioned before, we are collecting questions through the Q&A feature, but we will not respond to them publicly today. We want to make sure that everyone has all the information available and we're able to publicly publish it on our website. With that in mind, let me hand it off to my colleague, Nicole Steele, who will start by giving an overview of the Solar for All program.
Thank you, Ellie. Really appreciate you kicking today off and really appreciate everything that you've done to get this competition on paper and getting it out the door. So hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Steele. As Ellie said, I'm the Senior Advisor for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. I am currently wearing two hats across federal agencies. And so here at EPA, I am on the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund team, obviously, and have been fully supporting the Solar for All program. But I also wear a hat over at the Department of Energy, and I lead the Workforce and Equitable Access team in the Solar Energy Technologies Office. Bringing that experience to GGRF has been an incredible opportunity for interagency collaboration and really making sure that we are truly designing a program that's going to be effective and implementable. And so I really wanted to take a moment here and sort of set the stage on sort of this moment in time where we are in rolling out the Solar for All competition as part of the larger Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. We are at this moment in history where we all know that the GGRF was the largest non-tax program created under the Inflation Reduction Act and is a $7 billion competition, really with the purposes of ensuring that low-income and disadvantaged communities have access to the benefits of solar technology and the benefits that all come along with the deployment of solar. And we truly took that opportunity to make sure that that is an important element to the funding competition itself. What does the solar do for our low-income households and disadvantaged communities? A little bit of my background in bringing to the team. I was the executive director of a nonprofit organization that did low-income solar deployment, both rooftop solar and community solar, as well as storage, and had a job training model to make those programs successful. So really we built this competition with the lens of how to actually make this work on the ground and truly understanding the framework that is necessary across all geographies across this nation, from policy to regulatory to program design, and then actually what needs to get done through the implementation and how hard that can be. And so we really took that lens of flexibility and innovation, recognizing that every geography across this country is different. And so really want to make sure that we truly are lifting up the ability for, not only all low-income households in disadvantaged communities across the country, but all Americans can truly have access to the benefits of solar technology and through the different types of deployment. So both rooftop solar and community solar, as well as the benefits that storage and energy efficiency can provide to those households. So with that, I'm going to dive into a little bit more details. So again, Solar for All is really meant to spur deployment of both rooftop solar, so distributed generation, as well as community solar, really residential serving community solar, to lower energy bills for millions of Americans and really sort of catalyze this market transformation across the country as we need to deploy more and more solar. So under this competition, we really want to make sure that we're helping tackle both financial and non-financial barriers that limit the ability for low-income and disadvantaged communities to benefit from the rapid growth of solar deployment across the country. So for eligibility purposes, we're really supporting programs. So I think that's one of the main questions that we've been getting. Is this for programs? Is this for projects? The competition itself is for programs that will then ultimately deploy projects. And we'll get into a little bit more details around that. So the eligibility really is for state, territory, and tribal governments and municipalities, as well as other eligible recipients as defined as lending nonprofits. And so we'll go into a little bit more detail on that eligibility section as well later on in the presentation. No cost sharing requirement. And then there are some really important dates. Obviously, the deadline for the proposal itself is September 26, 2023. But there are 3 deadlines for a notice of intent that we'll also mention a couple more times in the presentation, because those are incredibly important deadlines, but they are different depending on what type of applicant you are, and they are required. So we want to make sure that we touch on that many, many times. We also anticipate making the awards, so money going out the door, approximately in the July 2024 timeframe. So again, the Solar for All competition is a $7 billion competition, really meant to be a national program, meaning serving many, many individual geographies across this country. We do anticipate making up to 60 awards, with those awards ranging between 25 million and 400 million. The period of performance, so the proposal should scope out a period of performance for up to 5 years. And we want to just really highlight that these are cooperative agreements, meaning, as those awards are made, you will work closely with the EPA and the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund team to ensure the success of those applications and those proposals. So Ellie, let's go to the next slide. I think if you have been involved with the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund over the last few months, you've probably seen this slide before, but this is a really, it's an important element to, again, sort of set the stage of what the sort of major impacts are meant to be coming out of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And so these program objectives really are to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but then to truly deliver benefits to all American communities, especially in low income and disadvantaged communities, so low income households and disadvantaged communities. But then the third objective is to also mobilize financing and other private sector capital to stimulate additional deployment. And so we'll go into a little bit more detail in this presentation, but we want to encourage leveraging as much private sector capital as possible to support the deployment of this program. So let's go to the next slide. I actually really like this slide. I think it's super helpful to talk about like how this program is working because we get so many questions about like how do I actually access solar panels on my roof. And so again, the competition is really meant to award grants directly to states, territories, tribal governments, municipalities, and other eligible nonprofit recipients to create these long-lasting programs that will provide both financial and technical assistance for the deployment of rooftop solar, as well as residential serving community solar. And so again, those entities that are submitting proposals are going to be designing the programs that will ultimately then fund the deployment of solar. Another major point is that 100% of these program funds must enable low income and disadvantaged community deployment for solar. And so again, it's a low income solar deployment program. And so the chart really, I think, is fantastic. Thanks, Ellie. That really talks about how like EPA is here. And then, we sort of go over to the next box and talk about the eligible recipients. And then the next boxes are really the residential rooftop solar projects and then the community solar projects. And so sort of that's the flow. And then the programs that those eligible entities or the applicants really will be proposing and then ultimately administering will provide a form of financial assistance. And so that could be as a grant or a loan or other types of financial assistance to deploy residential and community solar projects in their geography. And then also those same programs will support the technical assistance in order for that all to be successful. And so that could involve workforce development programs, customer acquisition programs, other types of project development support, such as siting and permitting and interfacing with utilities for interconnection process, whatever that might be. We know that sort of wraparound program administration element is such an important aspect to the success of the deployment aspect of the program. And then we also recognize that there are, challenges and barriers that exist in markets today. And so utilizing this program to, sort of design an approach to address those barriers and whether those policy or regulatory or programmatic barriers and how do we address them, work with stakeholders and ensure that there is a strong solar market in those geographies so that this program can be successful. So let's go to the next slide. And this is my last slide. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the timeline and then hand it over to Ellie. So as we all know, the Solar for All competition was released about 2 weeks ago on June 28th. So we're just after that. The first series of notice of intent. So I mentioned there are 3 deadlines for the notice of intent, depending on what type of applicant you are. So July 31st is the NOI due date for states, as well as the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico. The next deadline is August 14th, and that notice of intent is due for territories, municipalities, and other eligible recipients. And then the last NOI deadline is on August 28th for tribal governments. And Ellie will go over that again in case you miss those dates, because that's just such an important piece of the puzzle. And then last but not least, proposals are due on September 26, 2023. We envision reviewing those proposals over the next 6 to 9 months, recognizing that we will likely get a large amount and we'll be making up to 60 awards. And so we will hopefully be making announcements in spring 2024 with those awards being made in summer 2024, because we do have a statutory deadline to obligate these funds by September 30th, 2024. And so we really are moving on a rapid timeline here. But the other thing is we also recognize that 90 days is a short amount of time for a proposal. And so not everything needs to be figured out in those 90 days. We are weaving program design opportunities and elements into the sort of timeline, the implementation timeline itself. And so Ellie will talk a little bit more about that as well. So I am just truly excited that Solar for All is out on the street, and there's just such a large amount of interest in the program itself, and really fielding sort of the excitement around what Solar for All can do for this country. So please don't hesitate to reach out with your questions. We'll be fielding some questions that we've received prior to this webinar. But with that, thanks everyone. And I really, really look forward to providing more information as we continue down this path. So Ellie, over to you.
Thanks so much, Nicole, and thank you so much for all the work you've done throughout your career to bring us to this point. It is an exciting moment. With that in mind, let's dive into some of the nitty-gritty details of the notice of funding opportunity of the application. In this webinar, we are focusing on key parts of the application that are critical to eligibility and for understanding the program. But do please feel free to submit questions both into our inbox as well as into the Q&A section of this webinar. We will collect them and respond to them publicly, as I mentioned before. Additionally, I see a number of questions coming in. I want to reiterate a statement I made earlier, which is that this webinar is being recorded. It will be published online after we finish the webinar, as well as these slides. Now let's dive into one of the most important components of the application, the notice of intent. And before I go much further, I just want to draw your attention to, on the slides on the upper left-hand corner, you'll see in green a little note of which section of the notice of funding opportunity each of the page refers to. So if you have additional questions or need details on the material on the page, you can refer to the notice of funding opportunity posted on our website as well as on grants.gov. Now, as Nicole mentioned, one of the most important eligibility points of the competition is the notice of intent, which has near-term deadlines that depend based on the type of applicants you are. A notice of intent is required for all applicants to Solar for All. To submit a notice of intent, please email ggrf@epa.gov and include in your email one attachment that has, firstly, answers to the 5 required questions on this page, and secondly, a letter signed by an authorized official, which I'll get to on the next page. As I mentioned, you are required to submit an NOI and answer the 5 required questions for every application you intend to submit. Information submitted in the NOI must be identical to information submitted in the application, except for answers for question 1 for some applicants and answers to question 3.c for all applicants. Now, what are these questions that are required? The 5 questions you're required to answer as part of the notice of intent is, firstly, identifying the name of the organization that is submitting the application. Secondly, indicating how that applicant is eligible. So whether you are a state or territory, a tribal government, a municipality, or an eligible nonprofit recipient. Please use the criteria outlined in section 3.a eligible applicants of the notice of funding opportunity to understand your eligibility. I will also in this webinar explain eligibility in a couple slides. Thirdly, please, for every application you intend to submit, state the answers to the following 3 questions. Firstly, which award option you will apply for. I will explain the award options shortly, but either award option 1, 2, or 3. Fourthly, describe the program location that your program and application will cover. Describe the geographic coverage, as in what states, territories, tribal lands, municipalities your program will cover. Finally, please state an estimated amount of funding you will request in your application. We ask as much as possible to put your best guess at the time of submitting the NOI, the exact number you anticipate requesting from EPA. Now note, the answers to your questions in the NOI need to be identical to the information submitted in your application at the application deadline, except for responses to question 1 for some applicants and question 3.c for all applicants. For units of government that are states, territories, tribal governments, and individual municipalities, you may change the government agency that submits the application after the NOI is submitted, so long as each unit of government submits only one NOI for each application. If more than one agency of a unit of government submits an NOI, EPA staff will contact the agencies and advise them to coordinate to decide which agency or agencies will withdraw the NOIs such that EPA receives only one NOI per unit of government. Please note, eligible nonprofit recipients, councils of government, and intertribal consortia must be the same legal entity that submitted an NOI unless EPA's selection official or designee grants a waiver. Secondly, in regards to question 3.c, we understand that 30 days into a 90-day application period, you may not 100% have locked down the exact number of funds you will request from EPA. Thus, all applicants may change their responses to question 3.c in between submitting the NOI and submitting the final application. This means you may change the EPA requested funding amount, and if your requested funding amount changes, applicants must explain why the funding amount changed in the application. For example, you could become more ambitious in your program size. Please note that a list of organizations that submit NOIs will be made public on epa.gov/GGRF and updated frequently during the NOI open period. EPA will not publicly share which award option the applicant is applying for, nor information on the estimated EPA funding amount requested. Now, as I mentioned previously, in addition to answering those 5 questions, all NOIs must have a letter signed by an authorized official, which differs based on the type of applicant you are. So let's go by NOI deadline. If we start by the first NOI deadline, which is July 31st, 2023, eligible applicants that are states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico should have a letter signed by an official within the relevant governor's or for District of Columbia Mayor's office, or the director of the agency that will respond to the Solar for All competition. That is the first NOI deadline. The second NOI deadline is August 14th, 2023. On this deadline, this is a deadline for the territories who are eligible for this program, municipalities, including councils of government, and eligible nonprofit recipients. You'll see on this page details on exactly who for those different eligible applicants must sign the letter for the NOI. Again, it differs. Generally as an executive director of some sort or an official. Finally, the last NOI deadline is August 28th, 2023. This deadline is for tribal governments and includes intertribal consortia. For these applicants, the letter must be signed by the chief executive of the tribe or an executive director or equivalent senior management level official of the intertribal consortium that meet the requirements according to statute. Please note, NOIs for coalitions, if you are applying as a coalition, regardless of the type of applicant, only the lead applicant is required to submit an NOI according to the applicable requirements on this page, depending on the type of lead applicant. For example, if the lead applicant is a municipality, that means that the letter must be signed by the authorized officials listed on this page and must be submitted by August 14th. EPA recommends that coalition applicants include the names of all entities involved in the coalition, but it is not required as part of the notice of intent. We do want to highlight and emphasize very importantly that the notice of intent is an incredibly important threshold eligibility requirement. You are required to submit a notice of intent to be eligible to apply to this program. So please take note of those deadlines and requirements. Now, moving on to eligible applicants for the program. There are 4 types of eligible applicants to the Solar for All program. These based on statute. These types of eligible applicants are states, which according to the Clean Air Act includes territories, municipalities, which includes councils of government, tribal governments, including intertribal consortia, and then eligible recipients, which you will often hear us refer to as eligible nonprofit recipients. Let me get into some of those definitions because this is incredibly important, and particularly some of the more unique eligible applicants. So as I mentioned previously, the definition of state under the Clean Air Act includes territories. It includes the District of Columbia, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Guam, American Samoa, and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. Under the definition of municipalities, we include councils of government. So a municipality under this competition includes a city, town, borough, county, parish, district, or other public body created by or pursuant to state law. This term includes, as I mentioned previously, councils of government or COGs. These are entities created by or pursuant to the laws of one or more states, even if the COG is incorporated as a nonprofit organization. Tribal governments are under the Clean Air Act, an Indian tribe, as in any Indian tribe, band, nation, or other organized group or community, including any Alaska Native village, which is federally recognized as eligible for the special programs and services provided by the United States to Indians because of their status as Indians. In this competition, EPA includes intertribal consortia that meet the requirements of 40 CFR section 35.504 as an eligible applicant under this category, pursuant to that section, section B, to issue guidance extending intertribal consortia eligible to environmental programs established subsequent to the effective date of 40 CFR Part 35, Subpart B. As provided in that section, all members of the Intertribal Consortium must meet the definition of Indian tribe in Section 302R of the Clean Air Act. Finally, in addition to the eligible applicants that I listed above who are jurisdictional entities, we also, per statute, include eligible nonprofit recipients as eligible applicants to this program. Per the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund statute, an eligible recipient or an eligible nonprofit recipient is a nonprofit organization that is designed to provide capital, leverage private capital, and provide other forms of financial assistance for the rapid deployment of low and zero emissions products, technologies, and services. These are entities that do not take deposits other than deposits from repayments and other revenue received from financial assistance provided using grant funds under this program, is funded by public or charitable contributions, and invests in or finances projects alone or in the conjunction with other investors. Please note that there is additional requirements for councils of government, intertribal consortium, and eligible nonprofit recipients to provide evidence in their application that they qualify as an eligible applicant per the definitions in the notice of funding opportunity and on this page. Coalitions are eligible to apply to this program. A coalition application is composed of one lead applicant, which partners with one or more non-lead applicant members that are named in the application and would receive subawards in the form of subgrants to carry out a portion of the grant's activities if the application is selected. The lead applicant must be an eligible applicant and per the definitions on this page in the notice of funding opportunity, and must submit the application on behalf of the coalition. The non-lead coalition members may be eligible applicants as defined by the statute that authorizes the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, Section 134C1 of the Clean Air Act, as well as other types of nonprofits, governmental entities, and institutions of higher education that are entities eligible for subawards under the EPA subaward policy. With that in mind, we will now go and continue and deep dive on some of the important use of fund definitions in the notice of funding opportunity. Specifically, we will deep dive on zero emissions technologies, the types of technologies and projects that are eligible for financial assistance and technical assistance in this program, the definition of meaningful benefits with a deep dive on the definition of the 20% minimum household savings, the definition of low income and disadvantaged communities, and then definitions and examples of financial assistance, technical assistance, and program administration activities. As Nicole mentioned, the Solar for All grant competition will fund long-lasting programs that will then, that is run by one of the eligible applicants that I previously described, who will then provide financial and technical assistance to enable low-income and disadvantaged communities to deploy and benefit from zero emissions technologies, or the five categories of technologies listed on this page and in the notice of funding opportunity. Broadly speaking, there are two kind of major buckets of projects that can receive financial and technical assistance. And within those projects, you may also fund associated storage and enabling upgrades. So let's start with the first two buckets that I mentioned. Firstly, residential rooftop solar is the first major project bucket in this competition. Residential rooftop solar is any behind the meter solar, including rooftop solar, pole-mounted solar, and ground-mounted photovoltaic power producing facilities. These are assets which support households in single-family homes, multifamily homes, manufactured homes, as well as multifamily buildings. The second big bucket category is residential serving community solar. Under residential serving community solar, these are PV facilities with up to 5 megawatt nameplate capacity. And these are facilities that deliver at least 50% of the electricity generated by the facility to residential customers in the same utility territory as the facility. As I mentioned, in conjunction with one of those two programs, applicants may also propose programs that will then fund associated storage and or enabling upgrades. The definition of associated storage is infrastructure to store solar power for the purposes of maximizing residential rooftop solar and residential serving community solar as described earlier. Storage infrastructure should be deployed in conjunction with a residential solar project and maximize program benefits. The definition of enabling upgrades is investments in energy and building infrastructure that ensure a building is solar ready and to maximize benefits of solar deployment for households, such as roof repairs and energy efficiency. Financial assistance should be used in conjunction with financial assistance for enabling upgrades should be used in conjunction with financial assistance for a solar project. Financial assistance for enabling upgrades should be no more than 20% of financial assistance used during the duration of the program. Moving on. Now that we understand what types of projects can be funded with this program, let's discuss how EPA aims to ensure meaningful benefits are delivered to households who benefit from this program. This program, most importantly, aims to ensure that a minimum of 20% household saving is delivered to all households served by programs funded under this competition. But there are overall 5 meaningful benefits for residential distributed solar that this program considers a benefit for low-income and disadvantaged communities. These benefits are, firstly, household savings, which I'll dive deeper into in a second. Secondly, equitable access to solar. We aim to ensure that all programs funded under this competition increase access to solar generation for low-income and disadvantaged communities. Thirdly, we aim for all these programs to deliver resilience benefits to low-income and disadvantaged communities, hoping to increase power resiliency during a grid outage. Fourthly, this competition aims to ensure community ownership, facilitating ownership models that allow for low-income and disadvantaged communities and households to own the physical assets. And then finally, and importantly, throughout the notice of funding opportunity, workforce development and entrepreneurship is an important, meaningful benefit of residential distributed solar that we hope this program supports and expands by investing in high quality jobs and businesses in low-income and disadvantaged communities. As I mentioned, one of the most important meaningful benefits in this program is household savings. EPA aims to ensure that all households served by programs funded by Solar for All deliver at least 20% household savings, as defined as 20% of the average household electricity bill of the average household in the utility territory. To clarify, this benefit does not need to be calculated per individual household, but rather based on the average household in the utility area. Each applicant will need to design a financial subsidy or product that delivers this financial benefit, or the equivalent of it, to all households served under the program. 20% minimum household savings should be delivered net any additional costs households may incur from participating in this program. Now, as we know, multifamily master meter buildings are especially difficult to deliver solar benefits to, and programs should design strategies to ensure that their program can serve these types of households. For households without individual utility bills, household savings should be delivered as 20% or more of the average household's electricity bill as a financial or a non-financial benefit with an equivalent financial value that meaningfully improves the lives of households directly. In the notice of funding opportunity, in Appendix C, household savings guidance, you will see guidance from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development on some examples of how you might consider delivering these benefits to households without individual utility bills. Now, we've up until this point have used the word financial assistance and technical assistance a number of times throughout this presentation. Let's deep dive into the definition of those terms and provide some examples. With grant funds, applicants can broadly do, as I mentioned, financial assistance, project deployment technical assistance, and then program administration activities. Financial assistance is defined as financial payments to residential distributed solar projects consistent with the definition of federal financial assistance in 2 CFR section 200.1, as well as participant support costs in 2 CFR section 1500.1. Please note that there are additional guidance on how to manage potential program income in the notice of funding opportunity. Examples of this financial assistance that a program can provide to distributed solar projects include subgrants, rebates, debt, among other examples. Those are just examples, non-exhaustive. Under project deployment technical assistance, the definition of this of technical assistance in this competition is services and tools provided by grantees to communities as well as other energy stakeholders to overcome any non-financial barriers to solar deployment in the geography that the program is serving. These could include workforce development programs, customer outreach and education, project deployment assistance, including support with project siting, permitting, interconnection, as well as utility coordination for the purposes of project deployment. The last and final bucket of the potential use of funds includes program administration activities. These are expenditures that are necessary and reasonable for the performance of the award, consistent with 2 CFR section 200.403. Some examples of these activities include staff for administration, such as underwriting, reporting, and as well as procurement of services and tools that support the grantee and program design, such as technical assistance from the Department of Energy's national laboratories, which may help grantees create a successful Solar for All program. The last definition we'll deep dive into in this webinar today is the definition of low-income and disadvantaged communities. As we've mentioned a number of times, per the statute and per this program's goals, all funds for the from the Solar for All competition must be used to enable low-income and disadvantaged communities to deploy and benefit from residential distributed solar. This competition defines low-income and disadvantaged communities as one of 4 components. Firstly, the first component is CGS identified disadvantaged communities. The second component is EJ Screen identified disadvantaged communities. The third component is geographically dispersed low-income households. And the fourth and final one is properties providing affordable housing. I highly recommend you refer to the Notice of Funding Opportunity, section 1.D, competition terminology, to understand the full description of these types of communities. But in summary, CGS identified disadvantaged communities are all the communities, i.e. the geographic areas, that were identified as disadvantaged through the White House's Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, CGS. The second bucket, EJ Screen identified disadvantaged communities, is a limited subset of the supplemental, a limited supplemental set of census block groups that are at or above the 90th percentile for any of EJ Screen's supplemental indexes when compared to the national or state data. This also includes geographic areas within tribal lands as included in EJ Screen. Geographically dispersed low-income households includes any individuals or households with incomes generally at or below the greater of 80% area median income or 200% federal poverty line. Please note that there is a slightly broader definition for those living in non-metropolitan areas. Again, refer to the Notice of Funding Opportunity for the details. Additionally, this category includes individuals and households who are approved for a list of federal assistance programs based on income level that you will find in the Notice of Funding Opportunity with an award letter in the last 12 months. Additionally, this program includes properties providing affordable housing as low-income and disadvantaged communities. These include multifamily housing with rents not exceeding 30% of 80% AMI for at least half of residential units, and with an active affordability covenant from a list of housing assistance programs that you can find in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, and naturally occurring, i.e. unsubsidized, affordable housing with rents not exceeding 30% of 80% of AMI for at least half of the residential units. Now that we've gone over a number of the important use of fund definitions, let's go over the award options and amounts. Now, as Nicole has mentioned, and as we mentioned in the Notice of Funding Opportunities, all low-income and disadvantaged communities nationwide should be able to access the benefits of this program. Solar policies, economics, and market conditions vary significantly across states and territories. Thus, EPA has designed 3 award options to account for these varying contexts, while also leaving room for innovative programs to serve multiple markets and solve shared challenges across those multiple markets. Please note, EPA reserves the right to modify this award allocation based on the quality of applications that are received and other program considerations. EPA aims to maximize national geographic coverage of the program across all 3 award options. Finally, before I get into giving you an overview of the 3 award options, I do want to highlight this has been a question we've received a number of times. There is no limit on the number of applications an applicant can submit to this program. An entity may submit more than 1 application for the Solar for All competition and more than 1 application to a particular award option, so long as each application is for a different program, i.e. serving a different geography, has a different scope of work, and is separately submitted. Finally, an applicant may submit an application to more than 1 GGRF competition. Obviously, as many of you know, there are multiple Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund competitions. Solar for All is one of 3. It is the one that is open at this moment and the one we are discussing now. So with that in mind, let's dive a little bit into the 3 different award options. Award option number 1 is awards for state and territory programs that serve specific states or territories or a portion of a state or territory. All eligible applicants, including coalitions with a lead applicant that is an eligible applicant, are eligible to apply to award option 1. EPA anticipates making up to 65 awards in award option 1. Award option 2 is the American Indian and Alaska Native Programs Award option. This is for programs designed to serve American Indian and Alaska Native communities. In this award option, tribal governments and eligible nonprofit recipients are eligible to apply. And EPA anticipates making up to 5 awards in this award option. Finally, in award option 3, we are allowing tribal governments, municipalities, and eligible nonprofit recipients to submit programs that serve similar communities in multiple states. EPA anticipates making up to 5 awards in this, up to 10 awards in this award option. Importantly, while many of the kind of evaluative criteria is the same based for all the award options, there is slightly different expectations on the share of program funds that are used for financial assistance across the different award options. EPA broadly aims to maximize the share of grant funds flowing directly to solar projects in this competition. EPA will evaluate proposals more favorably if the applicants propose to use a minimum of 75 or 65, depending on award option, of program funds or more on financial assistance. These targets for financial assistance for solar projects include financial assistance for associated storage, as well as enabling upgrades used in conjunction with a solar project supported under this program. The remaining funds may be used for project development, technical assistance, and program administration, as I defined earlier. As I mentioned, the guidance on financial assistance expectations differs slightly by option type, award option type. Applicants to award option type 1 and award option number 3 are expected to use at least 75% of their grant funds for financial assistance. Since American Indian and Alaska Native communities face additional challenges in deploying solar, EPA intends to provide additional flexibility for applicants to award option number 2 to use a minimum of 65% of grant funds for financial assistance. Now, across all of the award options, EPA expects to make EPA expects award amounts to vary based on the geography and the proposed program deployment goals. EPA aims to award awards for both small programs, medium programs, and large programs. That gives us a wide range of award sizes that applicants can request. Awards will range from $25 million to $400 million. And as I mentioned before, all award options, as I previously described, are eligible to request any award amount in this range. Applicants should request an award amount that supports the number of households the program is designed to serve. And applicants should design programs that are calibrated to the geography and the population the applicant is proposing to serve. This should also be calibrated to the anticipated impact and ambition of the program. In the notice of funding opportunity and on this page, we have provided directional and approximate guidance for applicants to calibrate their award size to their anticipated number of households served. But please bear in mind that the table on this page and the table on the notice of funding opportunity are approximate guidance metrics for applicants to consider while preparing their application. EPA encourages applicants to maximize households served with the funds requested in their application, and applicants may justify in their application if the ratio of award amount requested to households served is meaningfully different than the guidance above. Just to be extra clear, in your application, you will tell us, you will tell EPA, this is the approximate number of households we aim to serve with our program, and this is the award amount we are requesting from EPA. And to emphasize, EPA is interested in award option in awarding awards for small programs, medium programs, and large programs. Now that we've gone over kind of the overarching structure of the competition, as well as some of the important definitions, we want to deep dive into the threshold eligibility requirements for the competition. These are incredibly important. The threshold eligibility requirements indicate whether your application will move on to the evaluation stage of the process. So please review this material in depth to make sure that you pass the threshold eligibility screen. Please refer to section 3.c of the notice of funding opportunity in order to know the details of threshold eligibility. I will emphasize that the material on these pages and as presented in this webinar is a summary of the threshold eligibility criteria. And we suggest and emphasize that you review this section in the notice of funding opportunity itself in depth. Now, in this, for the purposes of this webinar, we have broken up threshold eligibility criteria into 3 broad buckets or categories. First bucket, which I'll get to shortly, is the general threshold eligibility criteria. This is criteria that applies to all applications, regardless of the type of applicant or the type of award option the applicant is applying for. The second category is the applicant type threshold eligibility criteria. There is specific criteria or requirements that may differ based on the type of applicant you are. Specifically, if you are a coalition applicant, if you are a council of government applicant, if you are an intertribal consortium applicant, and if you are an eligible nonprofit recipient. Finally, the 3 award options that I've previously described have unique threshold eligibility criteria as well. If you are applying, you have to achieve all of the threshold eligibility criteria that apply to you based on your applicant type, as well as which award option you are applying for. The general threshold eligibility criteria on this page is numerous, but hopefully clear. Please refer to the notice of funding opportunity for additional detail. I will summarize here the different points. There's a number of submission requirements that you must adhere to be eligible for this program, including submitting your application through grants.gov by the application deadline, which is, to emphasize again, September 26, 2023. The second general threshold eligibility criteria is the notice of intent requirement. As we've emphasized a number of times in this webinar, you must submit a notice of intent by the deadline, by the requirements that we explained previously. You must be an eligible applicant as described previously. You must adhere to named contractors and named sub-recipients requirements, which Stephanie will explain shortly. Your scope of work the scope of work of your program must provide financial assistance as well as technical assistance to enable low-income and disadvantaged communities to deploy and benefit from residential rooftop and residential serving community solar, associated storage, and enabling upgrades. Applicants must request funds for activities that serve communities within the boundaries of the United States, including Puerto Rico and its territories. Applicants must request an award and describe a program to be expended over a period of performance of 5 years or less. Applications for an award must be no less than 25 million and no more than 400 million in federal funds. You must not include any unallowable costs described in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, Section 3D, allowable and unallowable costs. And then finally, your application must only address one of 3 award options. So again, for all applicants, this is the general threshold eligibility criteria. All applicants are held to this threshold eligibility criteria. The second category of threshold eligibility criteria is the eligibility criteria that apply to certain applicants. These applicants are councils of government, intertribal consortia, eligible nonprofit recipients, and coalitions. This is, for the most part, a requirement for applicants to provide evidence that they are an eligible applicant under the definitions provided in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. And you'll see some of those details on this page here. For a council of government applicant, you are required to submit a legal opinion from the state's attorney general's office of the state the COG is incorporated or chartered in, or the COG's chief legal officer, confirming that the entity is a public body created by or pursuant to state law. For intertribal consortia are required to submit documentation that the entity meets the requirements of 40 CFR Part 35.540C through a signed memorandum of agreement, charters, copies of emails, or conference call minutes establishing that the members of the consortium have authorized applying for the Solar for All funding or similar documentation that meets the regulatory requirements. For eligible nonprofit recipients must also submit supporting evidence, which could include organizational documents such as articles of incorporation or similar documents filed with a governmental authority as a condition of carrying out its activities, tax filings, financial statements, investment records, and/or any other information the applicant deems appropriate to demonstrate that the applicant satisfies all the requirements listed below. These requirements are the statutory definition of an eligible nonprofit recipient that I've previously described earlier. I'll repeat them here. One, that the applicant meets the definition of a nonprofit organization set forth in 2 CFR subpart 200.1. 2, that the organization has an organizational mission consistent with being designed to provide capital, leverage private capital, and provide other forms of financial assistance for the rapid deployment of low and zero emissions products, technologies, and services. 3, does not receive any deposit as defined in Section 3I of the Federal Deposit Insurance Act, or member account or account as defined in Section 101 of the Federal Credit Union Act. 4, is funded by public or charitable contributions. And 5, has the legal authority to invest in or finance projects. Now, if you are a coalition applicant, you must also submit a signed memorandum of agreement that confirms the participation of each coalition member in the application. Now, the last category of eligible threshold eligibility criteria is the threshold eligibility criteria, which differs based on the award option you are applying for. These are as follows. For award option number 1, state and territory programs, applicants must propose a program that serves low-income and disadvantaged communities in only one state or territory. For applicants to award option number 2, American Indian and Alaska Native programs, applicants must be a tribal government, including intertribal consortia, or an eligible nonprofit recipient. Eligible nonprofit recipient applicants to award option number 2 must have tribal leadership at the senior management level of the organization, which could be the chief executive officer, the chief operating officer, or at least one member of the board of directors, and demonstrated experience serving American Indian and Alaska Native communities. Finally, applicants to award option number 2 must propose a program that serves American Indian and Alaska Native communities. For applicants to award option number 3, multi-state programs, applicants must be either a municipality, including councils of government, or an eligible nonprofit recipient. Applicants must propose a program that serves low-income and disadvantaged communities in multiple states or territories. As I've mentioned before, the material that is covered on these pages and in the webinar is a summary of the threshold eligibility criteria, and does not include all the important details that applicants must follow to be eligible to apply to Solar for All. So please refer to the Notice of Funding Opportunity, section 3.c, threshold eligibility criteria, to understand all the threshold eligibility criteria. With all of that in mind, I will now pass the mic over to Stephanie Rich, attorney advisor here at EPA, who will walk through some of the key requirements on named contractors and named subrecipients, which, as I previously mentioned, is a threshold eligibility requirement. So Stephanie, over to you.
Thanks, Ellie. All right, so I'm going to go over some of the main types of transactions that a grantee can enter into, and what some of the important distinctions and requirements are, and specifically where we get a lot of questions. And there's a lot of information on these slides. I'm just going to hit the highlights, but I want to reiterate that all of this information is also in the link regulations, the guidance documents, and the NOFO. So they're here, but I want to underscore some areas where we do get a lot of questions. And again, please feel free to submit questions if we don't address yours. There are a lot of nuances, and we want to make sure we are being responsive. Beginning with subawards. A subaward is a financial assistance transaction where there's no profit between a grantee and a subrecipient to carry out the purpose of the grant. That's why you have to be eligible to receive a subaward. And they don't include payments to a procurement contractor, and they're different from what we refer to as participant support costs and program beneficiaries. A procurement contract is a competitive transaction, and it's for acquiring goods and services on commercial terms for a reasonable profit. And so price is a factor when selecting a contractor. And it's extremely important to remember to characterize the transaction consistently with the Uniform Grant Guidance. Is it a subaward or is it a contract? So it doesn't matter what you call the funding relationship. Some recipients might refer to a contractor as a partner and then try and characterize it as a subaward. What matters is what's in the Uniform Grant Guidance, and that we are interpreting that relationship consistent with the requirements. Transactions with for-profit companies and individual consultants are almost always going to fall under the procurement requirements. Let me repeat, transactions with for-profit companies and individual consultants are almost always going to be procurement contracts. It doesn't matter if you refer to them as partners. You have to look at the requirements. Next slide, please. And there are very limited exceptions for when a for-profit company, when when you can subaward to a for-profit company. Or when you don't have to follow the procurement requirements. And I've included two scenarios on the right-hand side of this slide here. The first is a subaward example. So say a grantee is subawarding to a for-profit entity to upgrade equipment to carry out the grant purpose. And that for-profit entity is maintaining ownership of the equipment. In this case, the grantee is not acquiring goods or services from the for-profit entity. The grantee is helping the for-profit entity upgrade the equipment for the purposes of the program. And the subaward costs can cover things like the company's administrative costs, engineering costs, the actual cost of the equipment. But the key here is that the company is not doing this for profit. They're doing it for the purposes of carrying out the grant. And then the other scenario is if a grantee is providing a rebate or a subsidy or some other sort of incentive to cover a portion of the costs of purchasing the equipment that's used to carry out the program. And again, in this case, the grantee would not be acquiring goods or services from the for-profit entity. The rebate or the subsidy, it would only be used to cover some or all of the costs of the equipment, and it would be considered participant support costs. And in that case, the company would be considered a program beneficiary. So there are limited instances where a for-profit entity or transaction with a for-profit entity would qualify as a subaward or program beneficiary. And if a grantee is going to be subawarding to a for-profit entity, they have to get prior approval from EPA. That can be in the actual application, or it can be during the period of performance. And we have, I just want to also mention that we have additional guidance on determining whether the transaction qualifies as a subaward. We have Appendix A of the subaward policy that really goes into the differences between a subaward and a procurement contract. So I really encourage you to refer to that because I think it would really help clarify and explain some of the nuances there. All right, next slide. So all recipients are required to follow the procurement requirements in the Uniform Grant Guidance, with the exception of states. States follow the same policies and procedures that they use for non-federal funds and still have to comply with the limited requirements that I've listed here from 2 CFR 200. And we have really helpful guidance on procuring services, supplies, and equipment that I encourage you to refer to. But it mostly covers non-state recipients, but even if you are a state, you may want to refer to this guidance because it could be helpful in monitoring a subrecipient's procurement, because the requirements, the procurement requirements flow down to a subrecipient. All right. And next slide, please. One thing you want to keep in mind is that there is a statutory cap that's been incorporated into EPA's regulations on the amount of compensation for individual consultants. And it's limited to level 4 of the federal executive schedule. EPA can't waive this cap. And I think only like OPM can change it. It doesn't cover consultants' overhead or travel funds, but when it applies, it's somewhat complicated. It's essentially a question of whether or not the consultant is acting as an employee of the recipient and is subject to the recipient's direction or control. So this means that a contract with a multi-employee firm is almost never going to trigger the cap because the firm is almost always in control when you contract with a consulting firm, because they'll decide which consultants you get. But if the recipient has a contract that names one specific individual that is providing the service, and it can only be that individual, then it's likely going to trigger this cap. So this is just something to be mindful of when working with consultants. And again, I would refer to the procurement guidance on the previous page, which has some examples and more information. All right, next slide, please. There are different monetary thresholds for acquisitions of goods and services that you want to be mindful of. Again, these are for entities other than states. States, again, follow their own procurement requirements. Purchases up to 10,000 do not need to go through the competition as long as it's distributed equitably among suppliers. So this is primarily for buying things like computers, supplies, things that are readily available in the commercial marketplace. You can also use it for services. But again, you have to distribute equitably. So you can't have a consultant who's on a contract and give them $10,000 every month for 5 months. that wouldn't qualify. And you're going to hear from the GMO that that's an unallowable cost. For larger contracts up to $250,000, EPA expects that you'll get prices and quotes from at least 3 potential vendors. You can do this through just email, and you can send screenshots, just as long as it's documented. The question that we get a lot is, well, do I have to take the lowest offer? And the answer to that is no. But if you don't take the lowest offer, you better have something in your files that explains why and have a good reason for not accepting the lowest offer. So a not good reason would be, well, we've done business with these people for years. Okay, no, we're trying to encourage development of markets and use of disadvantaged business enterprises to give folks a chance to compete. So, you have to put in a good faith effort. And the fact that you've used one contractor for many years is not a good reason to not go with someone who's offering a better deal. And then I'll also mention that you might hear from marketing services, oh, it's a federal grant. Well, in this case, your price is going to be 20% higher because it doesn't matter to you. It's not coming out of your pocket. But that is another form of audit bait that is going to be questioned, and the cost will be disallowed because they're not offering you the same prices being offered to their commercial customers. And then at the even higher levels, that's when formal advertising is required. You have sealed bidding, which is typically when just when price determines the selection, and then procurement by competitive proposals is when more than just the price is used in consideration. And again, we have lots of guidance on this that I have linked at the bottom of this slide. All right, we'll go on to the next one. Thanks. Sole source. Okay. There are very limited instances in which a grantee does not need to follow the competitive procurement requirements. And we hear this a lot. well, we're gonna go sole source because we think that's the best way, such and such contractors really familiar with our program and we've partnered with them for years. No, that is not gonna cut it. You have to follow the rules. Examples of legitimate sole source are things like patents. Say there's a unique patent technology available only from one source, and you have a sound justification. Say it's a piece of like, I don't know, say like you have to get an engineering justification. You have to demonstrate why it is that you need that technology. Another example is equipment maintenance agreements with manufacturers. Sometimes in order to keep a warranty, you have to use a specific manufacturer. And so you'll just need to demonstrate they were the only ones available that we could keep where we could keep our warranty. Very, very rarely are there going to be engineering firms or consulting firms that qualify as sole source because there are a lot out there. Then again, unique qualifications, that's not a qualification for sole source. And then lastly, I just want to also mention that under the Indian Self-Determination and Education and Assistance Act, there is a provision that gives tribes they can give preference when soliciting bids and proposals to Indian organizations and Indian economic enterprises. But it's important to keep in mind that that's not sole source. It's just giving preference when soliciting the bids. So they still have to be competed. All right, next page. Okay. So EPA doesn't encourage or require that anyone name a procurement contractor or subrecipient, except for this competition, we are requiring that coalition applicants name the coalition members. And otherwise, you just need to describe the program, and the program, the recipient needs to describe the program and if you intend to do subawards or procurement contracts. So applicants do not need to identify all the subgrantees unless you're talking about coalition members. Instead, the applicants need to identify in the budget narrative, in the budget table, the intent to award subawards, even if the subgrantee is not specifically identified. If you choose to name a contractor, including a consultant, you're going to have to show how you've complied with the procurement requirements for that contractor in procuring the goods and services of that contractor. And you also have to show how the named subrecipients are eligible. If you do not do that, if you do not show how the named contractors or the subrecipients comply, then the application will be rejected. This is a threshold requirement. All right. And let's see, lastly, I want to mention participant support costs. And participant support costs they're made by the grantee to program beneficiaries to carry out or to support participation in the program. So traditionally, they've been in the form of travel assistance, stipends, incentives. EPA has extended the definition of participant support costs to include rebates and subsidies. which we anticipate will be used in this program. And you'll just want to know that we have guidance on participant support costs that you'll want to refer to. There are a number of policy requirements, including having a written agreement between the recipient and the program beneficiary. That includes things like, the amount and what the activity is. And then, of course, anything that's in the terms and conditions and the program guidance, the rebate and subsidy will need to comply with. And with that, I'm going to pass it back off to Ellie.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Appreciate it. Now let's move on to discuss some of the application, well, all of the application materials required for this program, and get into some of the nitty-gritty of the application. To start off with, within the application that you submit, there's a set of mandatory documents as well as optional documents which you can submit to support your application. In the mandatory documents, there are a number of required forms that you'll see on this page and in the notice of funding opportunity, the application for federal assistance, budget information for non-construction programs, EPA key contacts form, EPA form 4700-4, pre-award compliance review report, as well as the grants.gov lobbying form. Those are a number of forms. Mandatory document number 6 is your program narrative. In your workspace on grants.gov, please use the project narrative attachment form to attach one document, which has a limit of 40 pages, to as your program narrative. This program narrative should address all of the criteria points which are explained in section 5 of the notice of funding opportunity, which I'll get to in a second. That's the evaluative criteria points. In addition to the program narrative, applications should also have the mandatory attachments to the application. Please use the project narrative attachment form again in your workspace on grants.gov to submit the attachments listed on the following page to your application. Please note that that attachment package does not count towards the 40-page limit for the program narrative, as I've previously described. Please limit the number of files you use to attach in both the program narrative and the attachments. We've asked that the program narrative be one attachment. For attachments, we ask that you consolidate them into one document as much as possible, excluding, for obvious reasons, Excel uploads and uploading them separately as needed if you use the optional Excel templates that EPA has provided, which I'll explain shortly. In addition to the mandatory documents, we have a number of optional documents. We have asked for additional optional attachments, which you can use the other attachments form in your workspace on grants.gov to submit documentation that helps support the strategies and plans that you will explain in your program narrative. Many of these are letters of support from stakeholders or potential partners, which will help support the programs and strategies you're describing in your program narrative. Additionally, as you complete the grants.gov lobbying form, it will determine if you need to submit a disclosure of lobbying activities form, if it is applicable to your organization. Taking a second to deep dive on those attachments that I highlighted in blue on the previous page, there are a number of mandatory attachments that you'll see on the left-hand side of this page, as well as optional other attachments. Under mandatory attachments, please include a summary program cover page as described in the notice of funding opportunity. Please additionally attach your notice of intent, which you will have previously submitted to our GGRF email address as described earlier. In attachment C, provide evidence documents supporting that you are an eligible applicant as described in section 3.A. Attachment D is your program planning timeline and work plan, which I will explain in a little bit more depth on the next page. It is described in section 1.7 of the program narrative, and we'll get to the Excel template shortly. Similarly, attachment E is your budget table, which is described in section 2.1 of the budget narrative, of the program narrative. There is extensive guidance on how to build your budget table in appendix B.A, guidance on detailed budget table, as well as an optional Excel template to include if helpful. Attachment F is the required programmatic capability and environmental results past performance, which is described in section 3 of the program narrative. For coalition applications, please in attachment G include your memorandum of agreement, which is evidence that of the coalition and partnerships, both of the partners who will receive Solar for All grant funds and the partners who will provide in-kind services that will support the applicants to achieve the GGRF program objectives. And finally, for applicants with proposed subgrants, please include an organizational table, which includes all the entities by name, if they are known at the time of application, or by description/type, and explain in 2 to 3 sentences or bullets what activity each entity will perform for the program. As you will notice, these attachments are very helpfully lettered, A through H. We ask that as you attach these attachments, if you could label in one document, if you could label which attachment letter each document pertains to, that would be immensely helpful for our purposes and make sure we understand exactly what you're including in your application at all times. Finally, there are optional other attachments described here on the right-hand side of this page. These are letters of support for different components of your program narrative and will pertain to different parts of your program narrative. I'll get to the evaluation criteria in a second, but I just want to emphasize I'm describing sections in the program narrative. Please refer to section 4.C to understand the different components of the program narrative, as well as the evaluative criteria that I'll get to shortly in this presentation. Now let's deep dive a little bit on the 2 attachments that were highlighted in blue on the previous page, attachment D and attachment E. For both of these attachments, EPA has provided an optional Excel workbook, which is available to download both on EPA's GGRF website, as well as in the grants.gov workspace as you prepare an application. These are optional templates. Applicants will not be penalized for not using these templates, but we hope that they will help make applying easier. The first optional template is attachment D. As described in the notice of funding opportunity, and as Nicole had explained earlier, 90 days is not a lot of time to prepare an application and prepare a full-fledged program. And so applicants may elect to include a program planning period in their application. This program planning period should not exceed 1 year. This planning period can give grantees time to refine program plans after receiving an award from EPA and before beginning to deploy financial and technical assistance. Using time as well as grant funds for program planning should help applicants create a strong foundation for a low-income solar program that is sustainable and long-lasting and fundamentally reshapes local solar markets to better serve low-income and disadvantaged communities. The work plan in attachment D, as well as that section in the program narrative, should describe how you will plan to implement the Solar for All program in year one, or however long your program planning is, including steps and milestones to implement the strategies and plans described in your application. You'll see here on this page, in the template that we've provided, we recommend you use column C to fill in the different activities and steps you will take, adding a row for each activity you will take to implement. The work in the work plan, we also suggest you include in column D the types of tools and program planning services like technical assistance the program will use to complete each of the activities as applicable. So if you use support from DOE's national laboratories to create a certain part of your program or to refine a certain strategy within your program, we recommend you list the plans out here. Finally, in column E, we recommend that you write or describe the different stakeholders you will engage with in order to complete that activity as applicable. Then columns F through G in the template is your standard Gantt chart. Please highlight which months the activity it will take place in and when it will be completed. In the templates, just so that you are aware, there is a tab for each component of the program strategy narrative. Next, we've also included a template for attachment E, the detailed budget table. This provides further information on figures in SF 424A. There's extensive guidance on how to create a budget table in Appendix B.A, guidance for the detailed budget table. There are also links to guidance from EPA on how to complete a budget table. But in the optional and template, some high-level guidance now, applicants must itemize costs related to personnel, fringe benefits, travel, equipment, installation or labor supplies, contractual costs and other direct costs such as subawards and participant support costs, indirect costs, and then finally the total costs. Note that a subaward made to a coalition member is the cost reflected in the budget rather than the cost that the subawardee charged to the subaward. Applicants should separate costs out, both for which of the costs are financial assistance in your budget table. So as you recall, EPA has suggested guidance of a share of program funds spent on financial assistance. This is that 75 number for award option number 1 and award option number 3, and 65% for award option number 2, where we recommend applicants use at least that amount, that percentage share of your program funds for financial assistance. We ask that you show in your budget table how your budget achieves or exceeds that recommendation by separating out those costs separately. Please note that in that separation, you should include both the direct costs for financial assistance as well as the indirect costs charged to those direct costs for financial assistance. Please find more guidance on the in the notice of funding opportunity. In the budget table, grantees will also need to include, or applicants will also need to include, itemized transfer funds to other entities. As Stephanie had already explained, the different types of transfer funds, subawards, participant support costs, and contracts. Please keep in mind that those need to be in the budget table itself as well. Subawards should fall under the other budget category, which will make more sense if you have the Excel in front of you. The participant support costs should also fall into the other category, and contracts should fall into the contractual budget category. Some examples of all of those costs are here on this page. And again, refer to the additional guidance in the notice of funding opportunity for more detail. Now that we've covered the what you need to include in your application, let's actually talk about the evaluation criteria, which is incredibly important. Now, applicants will be evaluated on the following components of the program narrative. Please refer to section 5.A evaluative criteria to understand how you will be evaluated within each of these sections, as well as within each of these components. All applications will be evaluated out of 245 points. Applicants should explicitly address the criteria in each of these sections as part of their application package submitted in the program narrative. The application, the program narrative has 3 sections: the program strategy narrative, the program administration narrative, and programmatic capabilities and environmental results past performance. The point allocations differ across all of these sections, as you will see. Within the program strategy narrative, there are 7 components to that. First is the impact assessment component worth 20 points. Second is the meaningful benefits plan worth 30 points. Meaningful benefits as defined earlier in the webinar. How are you achieving and delivering the meaningful benefits of residential distributed solar to households with this program? 3 is the distributed solar market strategy component, which is worth 30 points. Fourthly is the financial assistance strategy, which is worth 30 points. 5th is the project deployment technical assistance strategy, worth 20 points. 6th is the equitable access and meaningful involvement plan, worth 30 points. And finally, in the program strategy narrative, the 7th section is the program planning timeline and work plan narrative, which describes in narrative form what information you will provide in attachment D, as I previously described on an earlier page. Within the program administration narrative, there are 3 components to this section. Firstly is your budget narrative, which is worth 15 points. The budget narrative is a narrative explaining the budget table, as I previously described on the earlier page. Second is the fiscal stewardship plan, which is worth 20 points. And finally, the 3rd component is the reporting plan, which is worth 15 points. The last section is programmatic capabilities and environmental results past performance. This is the same section. This is the component is exactly the same section. It is worth 20 points. Please review section 5.A evaluation criteria of the notice of funding of opportunity. There is a lot of detail on what EPA will evaluate applicants on within each of these components. And we suggest you address each of these components and the evaluation criteria in your application. We also recommend that you explicitly label in your application each of the sections and how they relate to each of these components, making it clear what you're referring to in your application. With that in mind, we'll take a second to review national policy requirements, and I'll hand it back over to Stephanie to go through some of the most important ones.
Thanks, Ellie. Yeah, so you'll see in the NOFO there are a few cross-cutting statutes and policies that apply to the Solar for All program. And 2 of the most important ones are the Buy America and the Davis-Bacon requirements. And so it's important that recipients be mindful that certain projects are going to be subject to these requirements. For Buy America, Buy America requires that when an applicant is using grant funds, federal funds for the purchase of goods, products, and materials on any form of construction, alteration, maintenance, or repair of infrastructure, which is defined fairly broadly and in OMB guidance, that the Buy America preferences apply. So there are going to be terms and conditions that apply to projects that fall under the definition of infrastructure, and we'll apply these Buy America requirements unless there is a waiver in place that basically waives the requirement, the Buy America preference requirements for the infrastructure project. And then for Davis-Bacon, that's labor standards, prevailing wage requirements, reporting requirements, and those apply to construction projects. And the Clean Air Act has incorporated the Davis-Bacon standards as well. So construction projects in furtherance of grant programs under the Clean Air Act. So that includes the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. So grantees who are carrying out construction projects or that meet this definition of construction will have to comply with Davis-Bacon requirements. And again, there will be terms and conditions on this. And again, if you have any questions, need further guidance, definitely reach out. Take a look at the NOFO. There are a few other cross-cutting statutes listed. So I would, make sure to review those. And that is it. I just wanted to underscore those two.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. We're coming up towards the end of the webinar here. Want to highlight a few of the additional resources that are available to applicants to help prepare their application. Then we'll take some time to kind of review next steps and then discuss again kind of how important this program is and how historic it is. Throughout this presentation, we've highlighted a number of additional resources available in links in this presentation. And other resources to consider, EPA has a number of resources on applying to grants. I'll go over them shortly. Also highlighted a number of additional resources when it comes to partnership agreements, e.g. named contractors, subawards, solicitations, procurement that Stephanie had explained earlier, and then also have linked some information here on budget. But most importantly, one of the things I want to highlight here today with this group is that EPA has consolidated and published what is absolutely a non-exhaustive list, but a helpful starting list of resources on residential distributed solar and low-income and disadvantaged community solar programs that has been funded by the federal government. You can find this Excel list on EPA's website under Solar for All additional resources. You can also find this resource when you download the application from grants.gov. To cover the other resources that I briefly touched on, please refer to EPA's grants webinars, which has very helpful webinars from our colleagues on how to apply to an EPA grant, as well as a number of the considerations that we have explained here. Please also review the grants policy resources on EPA's websites. And then there's also some helpful material on grants management training, both for applicants as well as for recipients of EPA competitive grants. Finally, as we've hinted here and discussed in the notice of funding opportunity, you will submit your application on grants.gov. Grants.gov has resources on assistance listings available on grants.gov. They also have helpful videos on how to use grants.gov. So please refer to grants.gov for that material. In addition to a number of the resources that Stephanie mentioned, when it comes to procurement practices, please refer to EPA's solicitation clauses, as well as EPA's best practice guidance for procuring services, supplies, and equipment under the EPA assistance agreements. Finally, one of the most important policies that we've referenced a number of times to consider is the EPA subaward policy. Please refer to the subaward policy to understand subawards as well as coalition eligibility. Finally, when completing your budget table, please refer to EPA's detail guidance, budget detail guidance, as well as EPA's indirect cost guidance. As I mentioned earlier, there are direct costs and there are indirect costs allowable in your budget table and in your budget. So please review that material as well to understand what indirect costs are and how to charge them based on the type of applicant you are. That is the majority of the material I had wanted to cover today, or we had wanted to cover today. I just want to highlight a few additional questions that are to keep in mind. Firstly, thank you for submitting your questions here today. We are collecting them and will respond publicly to them on our website at GGRF at epa.gov/GGRF. And we hope to make sure that information is all public and available for everybody who are applying to this competition. We also are very, very thankful to all the questions that we've received into our inbox already. We are processing them and will similarly include answers on our FAQ page. Just to reiterate, if you haven't asked your question today and you have additional questions, please email ggrf@epa.gov. And just to re-emphasize a few of the questions that I've seen here that we've answered already to a certain degree, but just to re-emphasize them. The deadline to submit an application for Solar for All is September 26, 2023. Please be mindful of the earlier and additional NOI deadlines that are required to be eligible to apply. An applicant may submit multiple applications to Solar for All, so long as as those applications are for different programs, such as serving a different geography and a different scope of work, and is separately submitted. Each application must also address only one of the award options. Additionally, applicants may submit an application to more than one of the GGRF competitions. With that in mind, thank you all so much. Again, this is, as Nicole had mentioned, an incredibly historic opportunity, and we are all honored to be in the position we're in, to be able to launch this competition and hopefully fund long-lasting and impactful programs that deliver meaningful benefits, including 20% household savings to the households and the communities who need it the most. The emojis coming through are very encouraging. We are so excited to be here and to get to administer this program. And so please let us know if you have any questions through our inbox. And yes, thank you all so much. And also thank you all so much for who've already been a part of this program. It has felt like a very collaborative development process, both through the RFI responses, which we have read every single one, as well as through responses to the implementation framework earlier on in this process, as well as to the number of listening sessions. There are hundreds of people who have been on our listening sessions. There are hundreds of people who are on this webinar today. So it has been incredibly exciting and energizing to get to this point. With that in mind, I'll give you 8 minutes back. As mentioned, we will publish the recording to this webinar online on our website once we go through the appropriate processes to be able to publish this online. So we will make it available after the fact for folks to review. With that in mind, I'll conclude the webinar. Thank you all so much and have a good rest of your day.